Shalom and greetings from Israel. Welcome to all our friends near and far. I am delighted to open tonight's book launch, Lone Voice, The Wars of Isi Leibler. My name is Vera Moravitz, Chairman of the International Friends of Bar-Ilan University. At the request of our late, great, beloved Chancellor, Rabbi Professor Emanuel Rachman, whose strong friendship with Izi Leibler led to my visit to Australia some 25 years ago and my first meeting with Izi, I immediately knew this is a man whose passion and love for the state of Israel and the Jewish people knows no bounds. How appropriate it is for us to be gathering now, just a few short days after we read the Torah portion of Vayakel. The word Vayakel comes from the same root as the word Keilah, community, assembly, bringing people together. This is Izi Leibler, a man of Keilah, a pillar of the Jewish community, who has worked tirelessly for the benefit of the Jewish nation and people. He is a man of action, a man with a clear vision and focused goals. His dedicated efforts on behalf of the Soviet Jewry certainly paid off. 1 million former citizens of the Soviet Union made Aliyah, and they in turn made an enormous impact on our lives here. Izi is certainly a man of the book. His vast library bears testimony to this, and Bar-Ilan University is honored to have dedicated the Liebler Judaic Studies Reference and Reading Collection, as well as the central lending collection in our main library. We are so proud to share his passion and pass this legacy to our 19,000 students. It is ever so fitting that tonight's book launch is being emceed by Dr. Olga Golden, Director of our Library and Information Division. Olga, please.
Thank you, Vera, for that inspiring opening, and a very good evening to all our Zoomers, wherever you are in the world. It's indeed a great pleasure for me to act as your Master of Ceremonies tonight. I have to say that I feel a strong personal connection for today's event and for our today's hero. I was born in the Soviet Union. I lived in St. Petersburg, where I finished my academic studies. A lot of Soviet Jews then even could not imagine that one day it will be possible for them to come to Israel. Only a few dared. They had a dream. Their future plans and ambitions were solely focused on that picture. They fought, they were brave, but as I say, they were a few. It was almost impossible to fight the Soviet monster. And what a blessing that they were not alone. Izi Leibler, who in my eyes is a giant, fearless and strong, fought for his fellow Soviet Jews at times when the world looked the other way. And in the end, Pharaoh let the people go. And among thousands and thousands, my husband and I, together with our little son, made Aliyah in 1990, 31 years ago. If it weren't for the dedicated work of Izi Leibler, I would not be here today. Izi, I owe you a personal debt of gratitude. The Bar-Ilan Central Library was one of the earliest buildings on our campus and is classified as a heritage building. But now, due to the Liebler's generosity, we were able to modernize the interior of the library and make it more 21st century accessible. Izi also appreciates that even in this digital age, the value of the written book will never wane. And now it's my honor to call upon the president of Bar-Ilan University, Professor Aryeh Tzaban. Professor Aryeh Tzaban is a graduate of Bar-Ilan. founding director of Bar-Ilan Institute for Nanotechnology and Advanced Materials. Professor Taban is an influential researcher in the fields of materials science and renewable energy, author of hundreds of research papers and 5 book chapters, recipient of many prizes. He holds 13 patents, 7 of which are commercialized in 5 startup companies in energy-related fields. Professor Taban, please.
Shalom, shalom to you, Izzy. Shalom to the Liebler family, dear guests and fellow speakers. How privileged I am that I am now able to extend my brachot to you, Izzy, at the launch of your biography, your amazing biography. Your story is remarkable, covering the whole Jewish world, but most impressive, ending up here in Israel. As we always say, Na'eh Doresh, Na'eh Mekayem, arriving here to live in Israel. You had an incredible life, and you left an incredible mark on the international Jewish community. And therefore, in 2015, Bar-Ilan awarded you with the most deserved honorary doctorate, and I would like to quote, in recognition of your tireless effort to address the challenges facing the Jewish nation at every historic crossroads. The choice to award you was because you and Bar-Ilan share a common goal, ensuring that Jews of all backgrounds discover their Jewish identity. Izzy, my grandfather left St. Petersburg in 1919, when it was still St. Petersburg, and through Berlin he arrived in 1932 here in Israel, and I grew as a Sabra in Israel. But the rest of the family was left behind, and we always knew of this branch of the family that lived over there, excelled over there, but we had no way of meeting them. In 1988, a year that I am sure will be discussed more and more here during this evening, 2 weeks before Pesach, exactly at this time of the year, they arrived in Israel. And at that year, together with my grandfather and my grandmother, we had an amazing Seder, an amazing reunion of the family Seder, which was, I think, the most emotional Seder I ever had in my life. It is really exciting for me to be able to thank you in person for your amazing part in the reunion of my own personal family. May you be blessed with many more years with the remarkable energy and vitality that always characterized you. We look forward to seeing you more and more in Bar-Ilan. Toda rabah.
Thank you so much, Professor Taban, for your warm words and greetings. Thank you. And now, what an honor to call a member of Israeli Parliament, Minister of Health, former refusenik, and the prisoner of Zion, Yuri Edelstein. Minister Edelstein, please.
Thank you, Olga. Good evening to all of you. As a sign of these days, you know, normally at a ceremony like that, one should be standing on the stage, fully dressed. Right now, everyone is so comfortable in different places. And I'm very glad to join you from my car in the spirit of these days, and to see Izzy and all of you in this wonderful Liebler family, at least part of them, whom I can see here on the screen. I have to say that there are so many topics to talk about, and I'll start with something I was not planning to say. I just heard the opening remarks and looked at the picture of the library at the background. And I recall that during my visit to Australia, 32 years ago, 1989, while I was hosted by a young student leader there with an old broken car by the name of Jonathan Liebler, who was driving me around to meet Jewish students there. We spent a wonderful Shabbat in the home of Izi and Nomi Liebler. And the most impressive thing was not just the wonderful hospitality and the wonderful Shabbat meals and the prayers, but the most impressive thing was this never-ending library with shelves and shelves and shelves, and not enough space for all the books, and Izi closely familiar with every book, you know, looking for it and showing all kinds of raritet Jewish books. And I think that even after 32 years, I'm emotional when I recall this feeling of walking around this, as I've said, never-ending library. So nothing could be more suitable for this connection between the Izi Leibler and the Bar-Ilan University. But definitely my story with Izi is not about just libraries and books. It's about the Soviet Jewry. And I do have to say that Izi is personally responsible for one of the probably craziest experiences in my crazy life, when he very nonchalantly called me in 1989, a year and a half after I was released, thanks to the efforts of many, including Izi Leibler and other Jewish leaders from the Soviet Gulag. And after some hesitation by the Soviet authorities, I was released not just from what we used to call the small Gulag, but also the big Gulag, and was allowed to finally move to Israel. A year and a half, even a little bit less after that, we got a call from Izi, who said, as I've said very nonchalantly, we are going to Moscow to open the Solomon Michoel's Jewish Center, the first Jewish center in the former Soviet Union. Probably you would join us. Well, I do have to say that I've heard better offers in my life, but after some hesitation, I said, what the hell? Probably they won't let me in anyway, but to witness this strange turn of face in history, together with Izi and the rest of the delegation, would be quite an honor and quite an experience. And little do we know about things, and I flew to London. I met Izi there, and we both flew to Moscow. And the picture of Izi Leibler fixing the mezuzah to the doors of the first Jewish center after decades in the former Soviet Union was the front page picture of New York Times and some other newspapers the next day. So speaking about witnessing history, I think we are right now honored to be in the company of a man who was not just witnessing history, who was making history. And I think that it's all about choices we make. There is no doubt that Izi could be a prominent and generous Jewish leader in Australia. Well, we all understand that Australia is a very important country. Somehow it's probably not exactly the mainland. And you could stay there and do wonderful things, and you could contribute a lot to your Jewish community. And that was not the choice Izi made. He was not ready to accept the fact that Australia is somewhere far away. In all his activities on behalf of the Soviet Jewry and the Jewish people at large, he was really the world leader, not just some Jewish leader from Australia. He was the world leader. And I think his efforts as well as I said, as efforts of some other people like him, led to real change in the course of history. We are talking about a different world, not just about millions of Soviet Jews who were allowed to leave because of these efforts. We are talking about a different world we see. Yeah, a world still with a lot of problems and a lot of challenges, but it's still different from what we could see if it were not for courageous people like Izi with vision and with their stubborn desire to really influence things. So I recently read the book about Izi and his life and deeds. Many things in the book were familiar, some were less familiar. And I do have to say that it's not just a well-written book, it's a well-deserved book. And I'm very happy and very honored, Izi, to be here with you and your family and with all these wonderful friends of yours. Because, as I've said, I deeply respect people who act out of choice, who choose to influence and to fight and to move things forward. And you're a wonderful example of all of that. And as Professor Tzaban already mentioned, we here are not just talking about someone who was giving an advice, but someone who, in the most practical and physical sense of the word, in the end moved himself and most of his family to Israel. And you are all continuing doing wonderful things in our country. And I wish you many more years of good health and many more things that you still can do and will do, will be, I think, a blessing to all of us here in Israel, for the Jewish people around the world, and yes, for the world in general. So thank you very much. I hope that we'll still be able to see each other the way we used to after this whole coronavirus crisis. And for that, we need you in good health for many more years.
Thank you. Thank you, Yuri. Very much appreciated. And I'm very humbled by what you said. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister Edelstein. Can you imagine being released from a Soviet prison? I don't have to tell you about the hardships, deprivations, etc. And exactly a year and a half later, flying into Russia as a free man and sitting in on meetings with Izi, then Vice President of the WJC, and negotiating with your former captors on Jewish rights. It's really unbelievable. Thanks again. And our next speaker is Justice Professor Eliakim Rubinstein. The lives of Eliakim and Izi have been intertwined like a tapestry dating back from the 70s, where their involvement in Jewish affairs. From his term as a diplomat and cabinet secretary, carrying on his life as one of Israel's leading jurists, Eliakim Rubinstein's life path and milestones were all geared to enrich Jewish lives. In the Jewish world today, no one better than Justice Professor Rubinstein understands Izi's involvement and dedication and knows the void Izi left at the top level. Justice Professor Eliakim Rubinstein, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Goldin. And the fact that you have here in this very happy event, and of course, I congratulate the Izi and Naomi and the Liebler family, two Olim from the former Soviet Union, Minister Edelstein and Dr. Goldin. And that Dr. Goldin is running the library, which carries the generosity of the Liebler family of Izi and Naomi and their fantastic contribution of books and what they had at home and what they still have and what you could see when you visit Australia is in itself a Jewish miracle. I mean, and personally, I was somewhat involved in the struggle to get Yuli Edelstein home back in '87 speaking to the American ambassador at the time and all kinds of things like that. It makes me so happy to kind of connect to this beautiful event, and to Bar-Ilan, which personally I'm connected to in more than one way, and I will not dwell on that. But and of course, we say, בכל דור ודור חייב אדם לראות את עצמו כאילו הוא יצא ממצרים. We'll say that in the Seder night in a few days. In this generation, in a way, from my own family's perspective, it is בכל דור ודור חייב אדם לראות את עצמו כאילו הוא יצא מרוסיה, מברית המועצות, because my family stems from there, from both sides. So, and we're not going to speak about my family, but just to mention that my grandfather, later to perish in the Holocaust, was together with Trumpeldor, our national hero, as a prisoner of war with the Japanese in the Tsarist army back in 1905, and that my mother's family, those who did survive, came here in the 90s due to efforts of people like Izzy. And I still vividly remember those years of the struggle. And here comes a person from Australia. You know, I mean, you speak of struggling in the United States, you speak of somehow Israel, you speak of you know, the natural players. Is Australia a natural player? It's not. And here comes a person like Izzy, who became a figure not only in Soviet Jewry matters, but also in general Jewish life. And I wrote a foreword to the book by Professor Rutland, who is luckily here with us on the Zoom. I always say, Gam Zoom letova, at least. And the book is a kaleidoscope of a century, basically, and just full of you should read it, those who didn't. The headline of my foreword is Jewish Devotion, Courage, and Principle. Devotion is the persistence. I mean, it's not just that somebody comes to one conference or gives an interview or writes an article and that's it, and says, oh, I contributed. No, this is a journey of agonies and of problems and of visit canceled and of all kinds of manipulations by the Soviets, and and draft and getting the Australian government to work for this cause, the government, the parliament. These are all not simple things. That's devotion. And then there's courage. The courage is to confront President Reagan used to call the Soviet Union in his day an evil empire. So this was confronting an evil empire. And Izzy is a courageous person. He's not always easy, like, I mean, you don't spell it the same because he knows what he wants, but, and it wasn't easy, but he was easy. That is, he was himself. And and then there is principle. The principle is freedom. Freedom for everybody. Freedom for the Jewish people. Freedom for Soviet Jews. So here are the components, the elements of this remarkable life. And it's time for the historic record and this book, which is now basically a second book after the book that generally also by Professor Rutland and Sam Lipsky that describes was called, I think, Let My People Go. that describes the Australian effort in this respect. Now, this is the biography of Izi. And I think that being a Jewish immigrant as a kid from Antwerp, seeing the results of the Holocaust, the agonies, and growing up in the Australian Jewish community, which I must say is a noble community, the percentage of people having Jewish education, much of it also due to the liberal families' efforts, and so many Olim, including my very beloved next door neighbor. So this is the Goodman family. It makes you feel you understand the background, but then you need the person, and the person becomes, with his persistence, a significant and influential figure in Jewish life. And you all will read in the book, those who didn't, that Izi wanted to become an Israeli diplomat. Well, can I show you that the salary that he got from his business was better than what we got in the Foreign Service, but the idea was to help the Jewish people, and he was drafted by two so many years ago by two influential diplomats of the Jewish people, and they asked him to join the fight, and he did, and he became a diplomat, a Jewish diplomat, and the diplomacy that he was involved in is not less than any diplomacy of a professional diplomat. I wrote that being a diplomat doesn't mean soft. You imagine a diplomat, you imagine cocktails, you imagine receptions, you imagine memos, you imagine speaking nicely. That's not true for all diplomats, for Israeli diplomacy, but successful diplomats, I wrote, and I think that Izi is, if you read his articles, a successful diplomat, is that sometimes you have to hammer on the table. The American President Roosevelt, this is not Franklin Roosevelt, but Teddy Roosevelt. He said that the right way to conduct foreign policy is speak softly and carry a big stick. Izi understood that in a natural way because that's his character, and he became a never tiring, never shying away diplomat, raising his voice when necessary. So Shaul Avigur and Binyamin Eliav, of blessed memory, I knew personally Eliav was a man of virtue. When they drafted him for a 30-year fight, they knew whom they were picking. And I think that this is became a blessing for the Jewish people. And I know I have to who was it? Henry VIII said to each and every of his 6 wives, I won't keep you too long, so I have to be brief somewhat. But there was a big fight of two kinds. I was personally close to it. One was whether we should go public or we should speak just diplomatically. And I think that the school that Izi adhered to, which said that you have also to speak publicly, the public approach, was the right one. It proved itself. The Soviet Union understood the voice which was heard and understood the drafting the US publicly. People like George Shultz, people like President Reagan, others. That's one thing. The other thing was in Israel itself. This is less connected with Izzy, but the internal fight in the government. I was cabinet secretary, this is 88, whether to fight against Neshira. And Neshira, that is the dropouts, the people who left the Soviet Union on Israeli visas, that is the request from Israel, and then went to Rome and Vienna, and then went to the United States or elsewhere. And Prime Minister Shamir, who is not a major part in the book, but he hammered on the table on that. And there were others in the government who had other views. The independence of Izi's thinking, that is kind of inherent to his personality, made him a fighter, not only for the Soviet Jewry, which is a super main cause in his life, but also within Jewish organizations. We don't have the time to talk about that. And it was already mentioned by Professor Tzaban and by Minister Edelstein that Yuli was not only na'eh doresh, but also na'eh mekayem. That is, he made aliyah. His family made aliyah. This is 22 years ago in 1999. I visited Australia in 1993 for the first time and was hosted by him. And I knew from our conversation there that it's coming, and it came. And he became a voice in public debates, in public life, and always courageous, always persistent, always independent. This is something which you don't find that easily with other people. You found it in his articles, in the Jerusalem Post, in his columns, in his public life. So I'd like, before I bid you all farewell, just to say that Izzy has a partner in life that is Naomi, and Naomi is a shutefet, a partner in all his efforts. They raised together this beautiful family, Baruch Hashem, as my grandma would say, Kenan Hore, with children, grandchildren, you can't say Izzy without saying Naomi. So I'd like to congratulate Professor Ratner on the book and on the huge effort. This book is full with footnotes. It's documented. And I'd like to wish Izzy and Naomi, who also, by the way, did something which is unusual, their kibud em, kibud horim, but kibud em. It was so moving to be on the Friday night table with the two mothers of Izzy and Naomi, who lived a long life. And this is, they were not in a home, they were not in a senior citizens community, they were in the real home. So Izzy, Naomi, your life is an example. Mazal Tov on the book. There's a story here. Story should have been told. It is told. Chag Sameach v'kasher b'Nisan nig'alu v'Nisan atidin le'yigael. It applied to everybody, to Soviet Jewry, to us all, and Kol Tuv. Thank you.
Thank you, Eliakim. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Justice Professor Rubinstein, for your warm and so touching words. And now we will show you a tribute from former Prime Minister of Australia, John Howard, who worked very closely with Isi Leibler. Bar-Ilan University bestowed a honorary doctorate on John Howard during his year 2000 visit to Israel. John Howard personally told Isi Leibler that as long as he is a Prime Minister of Australia, the Jewish community and the people of Israel will never have reason to feel that he let them down. So please Nati?
I first got to know Izi Leibler in the late 1970s when I was treasurer in the Fraser government, but I really was impressed by him and impressed with his commitment to justice and freedom in the mid-1980s when he began his ultimately very successful campaign for that group of Soviet Jews, as they then were called, the refuseniks. Jews have been persecuted in Russia or the Soviet Union through the ages. Certainly they were under the Tsarist regime and they were under the Soviet communist regime. And so many of them wanted to leave the Soviet Union and go to Israel and find freedom and hope and a better future. And the Soviet government at the time was reluctant to let that happen. And Izi Leibler, as a leading figure in the Australian Jewish community, commenced a long and ultimately very effective campaign. He had a great influence on the then Australian Prime Minister, Bob Hawke, who was sympathetic to what Izi was trying to achieve. I was then the leader of the opposition, and I was also sympathetic. And it struck me at the time how meticulous Izi was in making sure that it was a bipartisan effort. He was dealing with the Labor government of the day, and he obviously wanted their sympathy, but he didn't ignore the then opposition. And that was a hallmark of Izi, who became not only an extremely successful businessman in the travel and related industries in Australia and around the world, but a hugely significant leader of the Australian Jewish community. He exemplified what that community has always represented to me and to so many Australians. Dedicated and fiercely loyal Australians, obviously committed to the cause of Israel's independence and right to exist free from molestation and constant attack from its neighbours, and also a community itself that's made a remarkable contribution to the development and the success of Australia over the years. Izi was very proud of his leadership of the Jewish community. He fought many battles against discrimination. He was successful in business. He's now spent years in Israel, and whenever I visit that country, which I like to do as often as possible, though pretty hard at the moment for obvious reasons, I always like to look him up. And the last time I was there, I had a remarkably pleasant dinner with him and his wife. So this is a wonderful book. It has taken probably 15 to 20 years of research on and off to compile, and it's a very special tribute to a man who's always been a fine Australian, a dedicated and faithful Jew, and someone who believes very strongly, as I do, in the future durability, strength, and rightful place in the world of the State of Israel.
A champion for Israel and the great statesman John Hoover. Thank you so much. And now I'm very pleased and proud to announce that you will be the first viewers of an exclusive interview with Izi Leibler made by renowned Israeli journalist Ehud Yaari.
Hi, Izi.
Hi, Ehud.
You're a warrior without a gun, and you have waged many battles in your life. From Qantas to the Claims Conference. What's your motto?
I am, by nature, a stubborn person, but I've always felt that when something is worth pursuing, you pursue it. And in my leadership roles, the one thing I never did, which many of my contemporaries did, was to look and see what the popular vote was. I always felt if something was right, you lead, you get people to follow you, you don't follow what is the popular thing. And in many times, I found myself in a situation where I had the majority against me, but was subsequently vindicated because justice, the thing I was fighting for, in most cases, I believe, and I think history proves, were justified.
You were never reluctant to take on strong opponents.
I experienced anti-Semitism when I was a little boy in school. I was a refugee from Belgium, just on the edge, just in the beginning of the Shoah, and I remember the Jewish boys in my class being taken into a shed in lunchtime and being abused. And I got them outside afterwards and I said, we have to fight back. All of them said, let it go. I got to get a number of my non-Jewish friends and we beat up every one of those guys. And I said to myself, you have to fight. You don't just take what's given to you. And nothing is impossible if it's right. And I think that started me on a path where I just simply was not prepared to compromise what I thought was right.
How difficult was the switch from diamonds to the travel industry?
The travel grew into something huge, again, because I got into confrontations. They thought they were putting me away, straight away. And every one of my friends told me, you are up against a giant. You're also up against the greatest cartel in the world, IATA, which has to back the national carrier. Give it up. And we went through the courts, and I must tell you, I was not sleeping nights thinking of the tactics and determining not to give up. And we finally won, but it was a hell of a battle.
You were drawn to public life early on, in Australia, and then here in Israel. What drove you?
I had a family, a father who became the president of the local Jewish community and was in a sense a representative of all the East European Jews who came and upturned the Anglo-Jewish establishment and took over. And my mother, who was very much involved in religious Zionism, she was one of the creators of Emunah, as it was then called, Ladies Mizrahi, and they showed me a feeling. There was always discussion in the house about problems facing the community. And I automatically fell into B'nai Akiva, of which I was one of the founders. And from that point on, I then became a head of the students' organization, which widened my horizons and enabled me to see the world in its widest gap from a religious Zionist viewpoint.
You have reached the leadership position in the Australian Jewish community, which I think is one of the best examples of successful advocacy for Israel and Jewish causes. Why?
I was a passionate Zionist. I was brought up in a passionate Zionist environment. And I felt that Jewish communities had so much after the Shoah, what was left of them. It was so important for us to retain the state that it was part and parcel of me. Every day I thought of the state of Israel and how important it was for me as a Jew. And I think that that was what impelled me the most. Israel was a centrality of my life. And I had always had ambitions to come and live here, but I became, because of circumstances, a Zionist who was encouraging others to go. And I'm very glad I was able to break that and come myself with my wife.
You have enlisted the support of Australian communists in the battle you were involved in for the rescue of Soviet Jewry.
I was the most hated person by the Communist Party. Their newspaper would carry articles describing me in the most despicable terms. Their chief agent, a man called Judah Watton, a true Jewish renegade, called me every name under the sun. And somehow or other, I felt that when problems were beginning with the Togliatti party, with the Italians, now was the time to try the soft spot. And I found two people, one a Jew and one a non-Jew, the non-Jew being the most responsible. And I managed to convince them that there was a problem. And I wrote an article, they agreed to accept an article for me in their journal. That article became so big, it became a booklet called Soviet Jewry and Human Rights. Now, what was my muzzle was, instead of ignoring it, it turned the communist world upside down. The Soviet embassy went berserk. The chief rabbi of Moscow abused me. All the leaders in Russia, Cold Warrior and all the rest of it, they made it into a personality.
How would you sum up your contribution to the campaign to get the doors open for Soviet Jews?
I would say
30 years of...
I would say the first was getting the first country in the world to raise this at the United Nations. That was critically important, and I'm told by people from within Israel that this had an impact on the government, which was then divided between Golda Meir and another group which said we should stand up and fight the Soviets, and the others that said it's useless. We should just try to coexist. When a country like Australia got up at the United Nations, apparently that tipped them over. And that's when they went into high gear. I was recruited by leading Israelis.
Shaul Avigur, the great.
Yes, he recruited me. When I first saw him, I was introduced to him by the ambassador, said someone to come and see me. He was most unimpressive. When I learned who he was, I was in a state of shock. And he said, you are going to represent us in the South Pacific region, Moshe Dekter in the United States, and Emmanuel Litvinov in London. The three of you are going to coordinate activities on Soviet Jewry. And we did. And the biggest enemy we had in our fight was none other than Nachum Goldman. Nachum Goldman was the king of the Jews. He'd been successful with reparations. He had a tongue of gold. Whatever he said went.
You had a big fight with him.
I was invited to go to a World Jewish Congress assembly meeting in Strasbourg. I was only 30 years old, and I got up and I made a 15-minute speech where I accused him of Stadlanut, explained what it was, and said that this is what has cursed us, and etc., etc. And I thought I'd be booed. To my amazement, when I sat down, I had a standing ovation. People were cheering. And to make matters better, Nachum Goldman was so outraged that he spent at least 1 hour attacking me, which made me, again, a world personality.
In the book you speak about a good old friend of mine, Reuven Merchav.
Yes.
And how you help him and others open up China, open up India, which was very hostile, hard to believe today. Can you briefly sum up your contribution there?
I had a connection through business with a top man, one of the top people, advisors to the foreign minister, the head of the American Institute. And this man gave me an interview, allowed things. I invited him to come to Australia and address a university, which was a nice way for a Chinese person to have a holiday. And he grabbed at it. I said, there's one condition. That one condition is you come for my dinner at my place and you meet an Israeli who I'm not going to tell you now who he is. That's where I got him and Reuven Merchav together. And from that point on, we kept moving. And I will never forget 2 weeks beforehand when the Chinese foreign minister met me and said, tell your people in 2 weeks we're going to have foreign relations with Israel. Now, I'm not saying I did that. I'm saying that this is part of a parcel of events which were moving in that direction.
India was more difficult.
India was much more difficult. India, I met Indira Gandhi. She was a role model of the third world greats. And I spoke to her and she said to me, I'll never forget, it's your people who are turning the Americans against me. It's you Jews who are making life difficult for me. And I remember saying to her, I thought it was my people who were always, when you were in London in exile, fighting for Indian independence. And she left me very, very bitter taste in my mouth that this woman was no friend of Jews. In fact, She detested Jews. I then, through the good offices of my foreign minister, managed to get an interview with another Indian Prime Minister, Rao. And this Indian Prime Minister, again, was a tough character. And I'll never forget one thing. The Australian ambassador had never met him and begged me to include him in the delegation. I said to him, look, my friend, you don't want to come to this. It's not going to be pleasant for you. No, I want to see him. And he sat there and trembled because I told this fellow, I thought I'd lost it, by the way. I told this fellow, you're going to New York in 2 weeks. They will treat you worse than Saddam Hussein if you don't recognize Israel. And he screamed at me, and the meeting was over, and I went with my head, pretty down. I thought, I've done it this time. I was no diplomat. 2 weeks later, diplomatic relations were announced.
One of the battles that you were waging, and I remember that because you were talking to me about that at the time, was with the World Jewish Congress.
Look, I saw the World Jewish Congress.
That was quite probably one of the toughest
Toughest
duels in the world of Jewish politics.
Ehud, you have to understand that I took on not only the giants of the World Jewish Congress, but I took on the American establishment in a sense. But when I came to Israel and I became more involved in the World Jewish Congress, I asked questions about the financing. And I got such a torrent of abuse that I smelt something was wrong. And this went on, and it exploded, and I discovered that millions of dollars was being diverted, let's put it in a nice way. And then 3 months later, they threw me out because they saw I was going to be a thorn in their side. And I will never forget.
Enfant terrible.
Yeah, I will never forget. They called the World Jewish Congress meeting, governing board meeting, not a governing board meeting, a general assembly to have elections, which was not the due time, only to get rid of me, because I was a senior vice president. And I must say, never in my life have I faced such a hostile crowd.
Yeah.
500 people were there, and I spoke by myself, being booed, not allowed to stand on the platform, being booed by 500 people, and people said he's finished. And at the end, it was unearthed, and Bronfman himself, before he died, Edgar Bronfman, before he died, said to me, I made a mistake, Singer was stealing from me. And he wasn't stealing from him, he was stealing from people that gave public monies.
You have taken very clear-cut stand in your articles in Israel, Israel Hayom, Jerusalem Post, on issues of the state and religion, critical of the Haredi politicians. Can you give me, please, the gist of your position on that?
I'm a religious Zionist, and I believe in moderation. And people like the late Yosef Burg were friends of mine, although he was much older, but that was the kind of approach that I liked. What was happening with religious Zionism was it was going in two extreme paths. One path was they were going Haredi, in other words, extreme, extreme, extreme. Each one was trying to outdo one another in the severity of interpretation of halakha, and that applied to things like conversions and wedding.
Would there be a Hebrew translation of your biography?
It is currently being translated, and I hope it will be out within a year and a half or so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ehud.
It was a really impressive conversation, and thanks so much to Mr. Ehud Yaari for this professional work, and of course to dear Izi Leibler. Immanuel Kant wrote once, "To be is to do." It's one of my favorite quotes, and it's about you, Izi. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Zavid Gross, who is a professor at Bar-Ilan University School of Education and also director of the Joseph Burke Chair in Education for Human Values, Tolerance, and Peace. Professor Gross, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much. I'm going to introduce Dudu Fisher. And dear Dudu Fisher, as a researcher, scholar, and academics, when I read Suzanne Rotland's autobiography of Isi Leibler, I realized that the struggle of the Jews of the Soviet Union to Israel comprised of several distinct stages, climaxing with the opening of the Solomon Michaelis Center. After 70 years of disappointment and frustration, the very first Jewish public cultural event was held in Moscow in February 1989. It was important not only because of the excellent quality of the musical contributions when two top Israeli stars, superstars, Dudu Fisher and Yafa Yarkoni performed, but especially because of its Zionist sociological significance. Rotland's account provides a very moving description of this event as illustrated by the photos in the book. Dudu, I'm sure being involved in this seminal event, the first Israeli to perform in Moscow, was a highlight for you. So we have prepared a surprise. We shall see a short video from that event, and then I would like to hear your memories. Let's see the video. Wow, this was really exciting. Dudu, I know you gave up one night of a performance of the Les Miserables in London to be in Moscow. Please tell us a little about how you felt at the time. I know that subsequently you visited Izi and were involved in many family events. Have you got a personal message for Izi? I think that the most moving song that you sang at this event was Bring Him Home. So we would like you to sing it now in Hebrew.
Hi, Zavi. Hi, Izi. How are you? Hi, Naomi. How are you doing? It's so great to see all of you. And I learned today so much about Izi, the things that I never knew before. But I want to tell you that what you have on camera there is something that you could take on camera. But what I remember most from this visit, of course, which is in my history. I mean, I couldn't write a book. If I write a book, I couldn't write a book without having this Isi Leibler chapter in this book. But I remember that we went to shul, we went to daven in the synagogue on that Shabbat, and you know, there were a few Jews that were not afraid to say that they are Jewish. Then it was really, really dangerous. I remember the theater, the Tchaikovsky theater in Moscow, was filled with the KGB police people during the show. And we went to synagogue on Saturday, and those Jews who were in the shul, they said to me, "Please, can you please sing for us something, because we have no tickets left. There are no tickets left for the show." And I went on stage, and I did a show for them. For half an hour, I was singing Yiddish songs, Israeli songs, and they touched my heart, you know, the Jews there. And Izi, what you did for the jury of the USSR at the time, And for me, personally in my life, and then of course we became friends. Unfortunately, I didn't see you for a long time now, but I visited you in your apartment in Jerusalem for many times. And really, I really want to thank you so much, because you gave my life, or the history of my life, my biography, you gave me such a great chapter, and which is of course with a lot of other chapters, but this one I will remember I will remember forever, because it was the first performance of Israelis in Moscow. Yafa Yarkoni, the late Yafa Yarkoni, which was a great star, and myself. And really, Izzy, I really wish you many, many years in good health. And I'm talking to you here from the safest place on earth today. I just came back from America, and I want to tell you, it's unbelievable how Israel is dealing with this COVID. And it's such a great feeling to come back home here and to stay here in Israel and to see how things are turning around. And we have such a great feeling now that maybe this COVID is behind us. So I would like to wish you and all your family Mazel Tov on the book, and I can't wait to see the book in Hebrew. I will definitely read it, and maybe we can do a show in Australia, and let's do something easy. Come on.
Thank you, Dudu. Really appreciate those words.
Let's have a show in Australia after the COVID, and we'll see you personally. I really miss you.
Likewise. Thank you very much.
And Naomi, I have to tell you that you look great.
Thank you.
You look wonderful. Okay. So Izzy, because I know Zavit, Dr. Zavit talked to me before, and she wants me to sing this one song from Les Miserables, Bring Him Home, which in Hebrew we call it Beshalom, Bring Him Home Safely. And I remember Cameron McIntosh, when he came to Israel and he saw the show, and he came backstage and offered me the role on Broadway, which I did later. He said to me, I don't understand, he said to me something, because in Israel, when you sing Bring Him Home, it's like no other place in the world. And I had to explain to him that in Israel, when you sing in the theater, 99.5% of the people have somebody in the army, or had somebody in the army, or praying for somebody, you know, a grandchild or a grandson or a son, that he will come back home safely. And wherever I sang this song all my life since then, it was always for the safety of my kids in the Israeli army and their friends, and of course to all the soldiers of Israel. So Zavit asked me to sing the song in Hebrew, Dafka. All right, let it be Hebrew. And this is Bring Him Home from Les Miserables. On the piano, my very good friend, Maestro Dror Alexander.
גורלו בידיך אלי הוא צעיר שמור דרכו עד ישוב אל ביתו בשלום, בשלום, בשלום. לו אלוקים היה נותן, אז הוא הבן שלי עוד קיץ תם מול עיניי, עבדו אי שם כל שנותיי, בסוף ימיי מתקרב אליי. תן לו זמן, הוא צעיר, הוא רק ילד, ילד קטן אלוהי, אלוהי, במרומים, תן לו יד, תן חיים, קח אותי, שלח אותו אל ביתו. Bring him home בשלום. Bring him home.
Wow, thank you very much, Dudu. It was amazing. And please stay with us as we are going to hear something special later. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was so important to sing it in Hebrew because Izi and Naomi are here in Israel and they are native Hebrew speaking. So this is really the moment where we really feel like Sabris when you are singing it in Hebrew. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I didn't know that they're here. I'm coming to visit.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Dudu. We will hear you later. I would like to introduce my dear, dear friend and colleague, Emeritus Professor Suzanne Rutland. She is a renowned Australian Jewish historian who has built an international reputation with her groundbreaking research covering topics relating to Jewish refugee migration to Australia in the 1930s and the 1940s, anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial in Australia, Soviet Jewry, Jews of Asia and Jewish education. Her book, Edge of the Diaspora, 2 Centuries of Jewish Settlement in Australia, is a classic. And the book, Let My People Go, the untold story of the Australia and Soviet Jews, co-authored with Sam Lipsky, was co-winner of the 2016 Australian Prime Minister's Literary Award of Australian History. She built the Department of Hebrew Biblical and Jewish Studies at the University of Sydney and was its chair for 11 years and is currently a member of the Australian delegation to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance and on its Education Working Group. Dear Suzanne, we have been working together for many, many, many years. And during that time, I know how much time you spent researching in Izi Leibler's archive. Izi's house has become literally your second home. As a researcher, we look forward to hearing your reflections. Dear Suzanne Rutland, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Zavid, and thank you to the wonderful speakers who came before me and their warm and moving words. And thanks to everyone who has joined us for this Zoom. Over the last 20 years, I've had the honor and privilege of researching in Izi Leibler's unique archive, an extensive library, a tiny drop of which you see behind me. This is what I call a treasure trove. And you might ask, how did I get the key to this treasure trove? Sorry, there we go. At the end of last century, I was approached to write a history of Jewish communal leadership in Australia. I became engrossed in the struggle of Soviet Jews, which we've heard a lot about tonight. I knew and was aware of Izi's landmark 1965 publication on the struggle of Soviet Jews and their human rights. And in that was a letter by an Australian communist, Rex Mortimer, who Izi referred to as the non-Jew who helped him. And as I was working in the National Archive on looking at the issues also of Soviet anti-Semitism, I came across references to Izi's name, and after it, there was a number, and that told me that Izi had his own security file. However, when I applied for access for the file, I was told they could not locate it. After 9 months back and forth, with the archive stating that they could not find the file, and my insisting that it had to be somewhere, they found it. It was unbelievable. As part of Izi's efforts to chasing, and we heard about it, the Australian communist leaders, he had been urged by the legendary Shul Avigor, who had recruited him, to see if he could get a communist leader to admit to Soviet anti-Semitism. Avigor stressed that there was no point for others to make that claim, because the Soviet response was, well, they're just anti-communist. However, a communist leader who had spent time in Moscow and was deeply embedded in the party structure, just as Rex Mortimer was another story. During a visit to Jerusalem at the end of 1999, I came armed with a copy of telephone conversations between Izi and the various communist leaders. Izi's phone was not being tapped, but the various communist leaders were by ASIO, the Australian Intelligence Organisation. And this included conversations between two Melbourne Jewish communists, Bernie Taft, whose name we see here, and Judah Watton. Judah Watton, a novelist, hated Izi with a passion. And the comments that he made and others were very derogatory. As we can see here, when Water commenting on Liebler, he says, just a waste of time. Liebler had his views and everything else was maneuvers. When I showed these conversations to Izi, he was chuffed. He always suspected that he had a security file, but now he knew that his suspicions were correct. I had found the key that opened the treasure trove to this amazing library that you see behind me, and above all, to the archive. And here we are today, 20 years later, celebrating the publication of his biography. There are so many facets to Izi's life that in this short launch, we can only touch on a few aspects. I have been asked, why did I choose the title, Lone Voice, The Wars of Isi Leibler? It was really the suggestion of my editor, Elliot Yeager. However, I knew that the title had to have the concept of Izi, the fighter, in it, because Izi was a fighter all his life, as this cartoon shows, standing on the crocodile. As we heard from the previous speakers, he had battles, starting with Qantas to the great battle he had with the World Jewish Congress. Whatever it was, Izi was never afraid to stand up for what he believed in. We have heard how he stood up to Dr. Nachum Goldman, as Izi described him, the king of the Jews in 1966. accusing Goldman of statlanut because he was advocating secret diplomacy rather than public demonstrations. Here was this young 32-year-old upstart from down under, what I call the edge of the diaspora, standing up and attacking the most senior leader of the Jewish diaspora. What chutzpah! As I ploughed my way through the 3 volumes dealing with the Qantas battle, each consisting of over 1,000 pages, I was on a knife edge, not knowing how it would all end, even though logically I knew that Izzy had to win the battle because he went on to build what became known as Jet Set. In the 1970s, one of the world's largest travel companies. One of the fascinating aspects of Izzy's life is the way he could build close friendships with key figures, particularly with Bob Hawke, the leader of the Labour Party, and also Malcolm Fraser, who was the leader of the Liberal Party. As we've heard from former Prime Minister tonight, John Howard, Izzy ensured that all his activities were completely bipartisan. When an Australian journalist wrote that he was a supporter of a particular Australian political party in the 1980s, Izzy demanded a retraction, insisting that he had never aligned himself with one Australian political party or another. This was important for all his political activities. Again, we heard about his key role in Asia. Central to his success, as he mentioned, was the support of Australian Foreign Minister at the time, Gareth Evans, who insisted, was seen with his work with Gareth Evans, the Foreign Minister, who insisted that all his ambassadors, and we're talking about over a dozen Asian countries, help Izzy in his campaign to give access, both in terms of supporting the rescission of the United Nations General Assembly resolution, Zionism equals racism, and also either in recognizing Israel, as in the case of China and India, as we've heard, but also sometimes strengthening ties with Israel, as in the case with Japan. In a letter to Izzy, upon reading the book, Rabbi Richard Hirsch, who I notice is with us this evening, wrote, Izzy, you are unique among lay leaders. Most lay leadership was a consequence of their philanthropic contributions. Your leadership, Izzy, is also philanthropic, but primarily intellectually. More than anyone else in your generation, you have used your pen and your voice to express key ideas. And this was so true, whether it was Soviet Jewry, or the case for Israel, or religious fanaticism, his opposition to religious extremism, both from the Haredi end, but also from the religious national end. Izzy expressed his views strongly. And he did so from a very firm foundation, books. In 1957, in his time in Israel, he describes how he salivated every time he walked past a bookshop and how he begged his parents for a bigger budget just so that he could buy books. At the same time, he was a family man. And as we see at the end of the book, surrounded by his 4 children, his 17 grandchildren, and the ever-growing number of great-grandchildren, he can feel a very deep sense of achievement. I would like to thank Izzy for giving me this opportunity to take this journey into his amazing life, to Naomi for being such a supportive life partner, to Elliot Yeager, my editor, to which I owe so much, to Judith Lander, Izzy's PA, for all her willing help and patience, and to my own children, my daughter, Ronette, and grandchildren in Sydney, accepting my long trips and my time away in Israel, and my son Benji here in Israel, now with his new wife, for all their support and assistance. Also my dear friend and colleague, Professor Zavit Gross. Zavit, thank you, Toda, for all your efforts. To Vera and to the entire Bar-Ilan team who made this launch possible. May we all be inspired by Izzy's battle for human rights in the Soviet Union and the well-being of Eretz Yisrael and Am Yisrael. Toda Rabba. Thank you.
Fantastic, Susan. Thank you very, very much. Really appreciate it. You've done a magnificent job. It's unbelievable what you've done, what you've achieved. When I saw the book, there were many, many episodes of which I myself had forgotten, which came back to life. You brought this back to life in a vivid way. And I think you created a fantastic biography. And I must stress to everyone, she did it on her own. I did not interfere. I did not direct. I did not guide. You'll find some mild criticisms of me on certain issues. I had no argument with anything she did. It's an independent biography. Suzanne, kol hakavod to you. Bar-Ilan University, thank you for the honor of gracing this magnificent opening. Couldn't dream of better. And I wish everybody Chag Sameach, Percussion Pesach, and may you all be well and enjoy the years to come.
Chag Sameach.
Thank you very much, Izzy. Thank you very much. And thank you, Naomi. We used to meet in the Emunah events. You were such an important figure in Emunah. You are such an important figure in Emunah. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, my dear friend and colleague, Suzanne. As a scholar, I think you did an outstanding job that will allow us researchers and the general public not only to get to understand Izzy's important contributions, but also to highlight the broader historical context. I'm looking forward to the Hebrew translation of the book, as it will enable Israelis to realize the amazing contribution of Isi Leibler to Israel and the world Jewry in general, and to the Soviet Jewry in particular. And now we'll move on to the next generation, so that the legacy of Isi Leibler will continue here in Israel. I would like to invite his lovely granddaughter, Abigail, to say some concluding words on behalf of the family. She is currently studying for a BA degree at the School of Education and the Department of Psychology at Bar-Ilan University. Abigail, the floor is yours.
I am a bit embarrassed tonight sharing the platform with so many impressive people, including, of course, my grandfather, Papa. But at the same time, I'm very proud to be here as a granddaughter. Not just me, but all the children and grandchildren. It is amazing for us to know that the fun and loving grandfather we grew up with is the same person whose life is described in the biography. But that is a strength of Papa. Despite all that he was involved in, we grew up believing that family was always his #1 priority. His commitment to us and his desire to impart his values, his arachim, is constantly felt and appreciated by each of us. Papa has always been a strong advocate of Torah U'Madam and Torah in Derech Eretz. Reading about his campaign against religious extremism, it made his message to us, the grandchildren, of the importance of Shvil Zahav all the more relevant. It is Papa's commitment to these values which made Bar-Ilan University such a perfect fit to take over his library. As someone who hopes to follow in his footsteps, it has a special meaning for me to attend a university which aspires to promote those values, that shaped Papa and Savta and motivated all their activities on behalf of Klal Yisrael. But it goes beyond that. The truth is, I would not be at Bar-Ilan University, nor would I even be in Israel if not for Papa and Savta. It is the values they instilled in our parents which shaped the direction of their lives and led them to making Aliyah, and we, the grandchildren, are the beneficiaries. In our family smachot, Papa often quotes from Sefer Mishlei, Ateret zkanim bnei banim v'tiferet banim avotam. His focus has always been at the beginning of the pasuk, Ateret zkanim bnei banim. The crown of the elders is their grandchildren. And yes, nothing gives us more joy than the nachat Papa and Savta enjoy, surrounded by their grandchildren in Israel, following your example and trying to emulate all that we have learned from you. But for us, the most important part of the pasuk is, V'tiferet banim avotam. You are the tiferet for us. It is you who have enriched our lives, charted the path for our future, and none of us could be more proud. So I'm delighted that I had the chance tonight to express how we, the grandchildren, feel about your legacy and how much it means to us. We are extremely grateful for the tremendous effort of Professor Rutland to put it all together. As much as we thought we knew our grandfather, you have opened our eyes to so much more, and it is something we will always cherish. Finally, on behalf of the family, we want to thank Bar-Ilan University for hosting the book launch. Thank you.
Very good, Abigail.
Wow.
Thank you very much.
Well done.
Thank you very much, Abigail. You moved us all to tears. I would like to wish Izzy and Naomi and your parents, especially Jonathan, your father, who has invested so much of his time and energy and worked so hard, both for the production of the book and for the success of this event. A lot of nachas from you. May you and all the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren be a blessing to the family. And now we will go back to Dudu Fisher to sing for us a medley of songs from Fiddler on the Roof. Dudu Fisher, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Dear God, you've made many, many poor people in the world. I know it's no shame to be poor, but it's no great honor either. So what would have been so terrible if I would have just a little fortune? If I were a rich man, all day long I'll diddle-diddle-dum. If I were a wealthy man, I wouldn't have to work hard. All day long I'll diddle-diddle-dum. If I were a little bit rich, I'd build a big tall house with the rooms by the dozen, right in the middle of the town. A fine tin roof with the real wooden floors below. There will be one long staircase just going up and one even longer coming down, and one more leading nowhere just for show. Everybody goes, oy vey. Come on, I want to hear you. Oy vey. Oh.
Oy vey.
Oh. I'd fill my yard with chicks and turkeys and geese and ducks for the town to see and hear, squawking just as noisily as they can. And all them will bang like a trumpet in the ear, as if to say here lives a wealthy man. And this is for all the shidduchim that will come. Is this the little girl I carry? Is this the little boy at play? I don't remember growing older. When did she get to be a beauty?
When did he grow to be so tall? Wasn't it yesterday when they were small? Sing with me now. Sunrise, sunset, sunrise, sunset. Swiftly fly the days. Seedlings turn overnight to sunflowers. Blossom big gaze. Sunrise, sunset, sunrise, sunset. Swiftly fly the years. One season following another, laden with happiness and tears. Come on, everybody, l'chaim. To life, l'chaim. L'chaim, l'chaim, to life. One day it's hot meat and raisin cake. Next day it's stomach cake. Drink l'chaim, to life, l'chaim. L'chaim, l'chaim, to life. If you've been lucky, then Monday was no worse than Sunday was. Drink l'chaim, to life. Hey, God will like joyful, even though our hearts like bending on the floor. How much can we be joyful even when there's nothing to be joyful for? Together with you, everybody, to the book, to Izi Leibler, to life, l'chaim, to life, l'chaim. L'chaim, l'chaim, to life. If you've been lucky, then Monday was no worse than Sunday was. Drink l'chaim.
L'chaim, you.
For life. L'chaim Izi, l'chaim Nomi.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, my pleasure.
Bravo.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you so much, Dudu.
Thank you so much, Dudu. You are the best.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dudu Fisher. It was outstanding. You have moved us all. L'chaim, l'chaim also to Dudu Fisher.
L'chaim to all of us.
And now, I'm happy to pass the floor back to Vera Moravitz. She has powered our university over many, many decades. Her intelligence and dedication are unbelievable. Vera, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Zavit. I want to tell you on behalf of everyone, it was such a pleasure to organize this. Izi and Naomi mean so much to us. We at Bar-Ilan echo their sentiments, their values, their ethics, their morals. It was a pleasure to work with Jonathan and here, the next generation, Abigail. We know, Izi, you can be assured that you've got so many people who love you and take after you. And all I want to say is thank you for giving us the privilege of having such an emotional and exciting evening. And on behalf of Professor Arya Tzaban, I would like to issue a personal invitation to everybody here tonight to visit Bar-Ilan, to see the exciting research in our laboratories, to see the refurbished libraries. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic. A big thank you to Naomi and to your family, to all the participants, to the organizers. Izi, l'chaim to you. Chag Pesach Kasher v'Sameach. Shalom, everybody. God bless you all.
Shalom, Chag Sameach. Chag Sameach.